Hello there, this is Destron and I'm here today to bring you another video for our High Score Leaderboard Lite SQL tutorial. And today I'm going to show you how to integrate that extension into an existing game. You may have a game that's already halfway or most of the way finished and decide that you want to add a high score table toward the end, and this extension makes that easy to do so, and it can seamlessly integrate into whatever you've already got going on as long as you already have a global variable that holds your score. Now, how you approach integrating this is up to you, but hopefully this will give you a little bit of insight on how to get started in integrating it into an existing project. To get started, we're going to take a look at this example project here I created for the video. We're going to pretend this is a game that's halfway or most of the way completed, or could even be 100% completed. It's just a small demo I created for the purpose of this video though. Let's give it a quick play and see what it does. You can see it simply has a new game button. Click that, gives a little bit of instructions. Left, right arrow moves left and right. Space fires the gun, destroy asteroids or points. Or you can simply press the up arrow to increase the score. I have it programmed a way for you to die, so just press E to end the game. Press the space bar to continue. So you got a little example game here, shooting asteroids. Every time you shoot an asteroid, your score goes up. And hit E to end the game and it simply restarts it. Now you would probably have a game over screen or something at this point, but what we want to do now is decide whether we want to insert that score into our database or just simply show a normal game over screen because they didn't get a high enough score. So to begin, we're going to import the extension into the game. We're going to go to My Library, and you can see I have High Score Leaderboard Lite SQL. It's ready for use. If yours isn't, then simply click the download button, and then we're going to add it to the project. Now we only want the scripts and the included files. We don't want the objects of the rooms because those were intended to show you how the example works. We don't need those if we're integrating that into an existing game. You could use those and modify them to work with your game, but we're just going to use the scripts and the included files. Click OK. You'll see those show up in your resource tree, so we're going to close that. Now before we continue, let's talk about the logic and how these scripts work and what we're trying to accomplish here. The extension consists of the 7 scripts here. The functions for the extension are all asynchronous functions, so they send out a call and they're going to receive a result. So they're double-sided here. You get the check score, you get the check score result. Insert score result, get list, and get list result. These execute the asynchronous functions, and these handles the return for that functions. Then the last one here, the GSString explode. This is not an asynchronous function. What happens is when you execute get list result receives one long string from your web server. So GSString explode will explode that up and sort it into a data structure so that you can use to build your high scores table with. So this is just an extra utility to help it along. The way the extension works is once you have a final score for your player, you're going to pull the lowest score available from the database using check score and compare that against the player's score. If the player's score is higher than the result of check score, then he wins a chance to insert his score into the database. If his score is lower, then his score is lower than the lowest score in the database, so he did not get a new high score. Now, one thing that's important to know about the GS check score script is if we take a look at the included manual, you will see that it will return 2 global variables, low score ID and low score. Low score is what will be used to compare against the player's current score. Low score ID is the ID of the row that contains the lowest score. So if you're going to insert a new score, you're going to need that ID number. But those will get returned automatically by calling the GS check score script, which you should always do first anyway. So to get started with the integration into your game, the first thing you're going to have to do is set up your database and insert the sample table included in the included files here. and set up your lblpdo.php script. We just had a video about that, and it's included in the manual, so I know we're not going to spend a lot of time with doing that here. Just know you'll need those set up and ready to go. The one thing we are going to have to do though is add in the macro. And remember, it's my lowercase, URL in all caps. We are going to use the sample that we created for the last video. Don't forget your trailing slash there. And you're welcome to use this as well if you just want to test things out. I'm not going to take it down. I created it just to use for these examples, so it'll be there as long as 000 webhost leaves it there. Once you've added that in, click OK. And the next thing we need to do is set up how we're going to handle when the game ends. The first thing we're going to do is run the check score script so that we can get the lowest available score from the database. So the way this example is set up, you have OBJ score controller here. It's pretty simple. On the created event, it has the global.uScore. That is going to be the player score variable, so that's where the player's score is being stored at. Over here in OBJ ship, here's where we have the release E event. That's where we end the game at. So we want to make a change there. Right now we simply restart the game. We're going to remove that, and we're going to do GS check score. And there's no arguments to that, so we're just going to simply close that. And remember, this is an asynchronous event, so as soon as we push the E key, it's going to fire off that asynchronous event, and we're going to get a return on that, so we need to handle that return. So we're going to come in here and add an async HTTP event. And over there, we're going to call GS check score return. Result, sorry. So once we call that, what's going to happen here is it's going to take the DS map that's returned, one we call GS check score, and it's going to extract from that the lowest score and the ID. And it's going to store those into two variables, low score and low score ID. So we now have these two variables to work with as well. You're going to have to remember those for when you go to do an insert, and you're going to need low score right now when we make a comparison. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an alarm event. And we're going to do this on an alarm 1 because we already have an alarm O for the ship object here. And we're going to try that at 10 to start with. Now in a perfect world, we would receive that result immediately, but with the internet being the internet, sometimes there's a delay, so we want to give the game a little time before we start trying to work with those new variables. That way we don't get any errors. 10 steps is usually about enough to make sure that that information is received and processed before we start trying to use it. Now we're going to add the alarm 1 event and execute a piece of code, and here's where we're going to make the comparison between the player score and the low score that was returned from the database. So we're going to do if real global.uScore, that is your in-game score, is greater than real global.lowScore. And remember, this is the score that's returned from the GS check score result script. That's going to be the variable that holds that lowest score. We're going to do room, go to, good score. And this room doesn't exist yet, but we're going to create it here in a minute. Else, to do room, go to score table. And then we're going to create these two rooms here in a second. Good score will be this room that the player goes to enter their name for the high score table. And score table will end up being the room that displays the high score table. So right now we'll create those rooms. Then double checking, we can see that we did those right. If you'd like to test and make sure that these got set up correctly, we can go back into good score. Here in the creation code, we'll just do show message. Good job. Remember, this show message is for debug only. We'll go back into score table, go into the creation code, do show message, no good. Let's give the game a quick run. Run our score up here, hit E, and we got a high score, so we get the good job message. One more quick run, and we'll just hit E on 0, no good. So we know that that comparison is working correctly. Let's go back in and take those back out of our creation code. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is set up the actual high score table. So we're going to create a new object for that, and we're going to call that obj table. And it doesn't need a sprite, obviously. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a create event, doing a piece of code. Now again, the internet being perfect, this object is going to fetch and draw the table, but it may take a moment to come in. So we're going to create a local variable, dt, stands for draw table, and we're going to set that to 0, that we'll use in a moment. And then we're going to do get list, gs get list. This will get your high score list, and it requires one argument, and that's the size of your list. We want to go 10 for a full 10 high scores, and that's all you need to do there for the moment. And remember, get list is an asynchronous event, so it's going to have a return. So we're going to go to the asynchronous HTTP, and we're going to add in a code and choose get list result, and it's going to need the same argument of 10. If you called for 5 in the first call, then you're going to call for 5 again in this one. And we're going to set alarm O, and we'll try 10 steps again. Close out of there. And then we're going to add the alarm O event. And in this event, we're going to set the dt variable to 1. So that gives us 10 steps between the time that we receive the list to the time we set the table to 1, so that we can tell the game that it's okay now to draw the table. Lastly, we need to add a draw event so that we can actually draw the table to the screen. The table was received here with gs get list result, but now we need to draw the table out. And we're going to add in a piece of code. Now, I've come to find through supporting people with this that drawing the table is actually one of the hardest things to do. Basically, what happens when the table is received as one long string that is delimited by commas and bars. So, for example, if you called for 4 results, you would get this: name, comma, score, bar, name, comma, score, bar, name, comma, score, bar. You get the idea. So the game internally has to break those apart, and that's where the GS string explode script comes in. Is it'll break these apart first by bars, so you end up with just test comma 200, test comma 400, and then it'll break them up again into the name and the score, so that the end result is a DS list containing the names and the scores as separate values like this. And this is somewhat how it would be arranged. You'd have the name, the score, the name, the score, the name, the score. So when you draw through that, you have to loop through every other row. So to help with that, by the time this video is posted, I will have launched a new version of the High Score Leaderboard Lite SQL extension that will include a new script called GS Draw Table. That wasn't in here because I downloaded it directly from the market, but we're going to go ahead and add that in right now. And that will end up being in the utility folder. And this kind of shows you an example of what happens. Is you get your DS list as name, score, name, score. We have to break that apart and loop through it and draw that out. So this will have 4 arguments. One will be the X location of where the table starts to draw, then the Y location, then the spacing between the columns, and then the spacing between the rows. So coming back over here, we're going to do if dt equals 1. We want to draw the table, so we're going to do GS draw table. And for some test values, we're going to do X100, Y200, 200 column gap, and a 20 row gap. And we're going to see how that looks. And that will pretty much take care of drawing your table. So we want to drop that into the score table room. And you can just drop that in there anywhere. So now that's going to draw that table, and of course we know if we get a bad score, we automatically go to that score table room. So let's jump back in here. Do a test run. And we're going to give ourselves a bad score. And you can see our tables being drawn there, so that's working out perfectly. Close back out of there. And the next thing we need to handle now is letting a person register their name when they actually get a good score. So we're going to go here and create a new object. And we're going to call that obj insert, because this will insert them into the database if they received a good score. They don't need a sprite. And for this example, we're going to let the person type it into the screen instead of the get message async where it pops up a box. So we're going to add event, a create event. And that create event, we're going to set the keyboard string to an empty. Sure that the keyboard string is empty when we start. That way there's no erroneous type character showing up in there. Then we're going to add a draw event. And most of the game text is white, but we want to make sure that this text is black. So we're going to do this just to make sure we're getting black text. And we're going to draw the text that the player is typing on the screen. Let's go 50 to 08 just for some test values. And then we need to change the color back. And that should be set, not text. And what this will basically do is draw whatever the player types onto the screen. And lastly, we need to handle when they're done typing. We'll go ahead and do that in the enter event. So let's do a key release enter. And this is we're going to handle the insert into the database by using the keyboard string that the player just typed. So here we are going to do GS insert score, and you're going to need the name, which is the keyboard string, and then you're going to need the player score, which is going to be global.uScore. Those are the only two arguments that requires. The third argument it requires is the global.lowScoreID, but that's automatically inserted for you in the GS insert score script, so you don't have to worry about that. You just need to get the name, however you collected it. Is it stored in a variable, whatever. In this case, we're collecting it right now via keyboard string, and the global score, whatever variable you're using to store the player score with. Now this script does have a return. It's not 100% necessary that you check for it. It'll return a 1 or a 0. It'll obviously 1 if it's successfully inserted, a 0 if it did not. That's up to you if you want to check from it from there. We're not going to check for it right now. We're just going to do alarm. Alarm O equals 10. That again is going to give it a few minutes, a few steps to process what's going on. And we're going to add an alarm O event, and we're going to do room go to score table. So basically what's going to happen now is once you hit the E, it's going to take the player score, it's going to compare it to the score it pulled from the database. If the player score is higher, it's going to take them to the good score room where they're going to enter their name, hit enter, and then it's going to take them back to score table with an updated score list including their name. If they had a low score, then it's going to take them directly to the score table room. So let's give that a run and make sure it's all working out properly. But before we do so, we need to make sure that we drop our OBG insert into our good score room. And we'll go ahead and give this a test run. So once again, with the score of 0, a bad score, we hit the E. It's going to take us straight into the room where we display our table. Give that one more test run. And let's run our score up pretty high here, and then we're going to hit the E again, and it's going to take us into what looks like a blank room. But if we start typing, we can see that our string is showing up on the screen, so we're going to just type something. I'm going to type DesktronLB test, and then we're going to hit the enter key. And again, it's going to take us back into our high score room with DesktronLB test there at the top, so you can see that everything's working correctly. This has been integrated into that game. The high score is working, but it's obviously kind of plain. So let's tweak this a little bit and make it look a little prettier. Jumping up into backgrounds, let's add in a background. I've got a couple saved on my desktop. Let's do BGR register. And you can see it's asking for a name here. And this is obviously an old background from a previous script, but that's okay. And we're going to name this BGR name. And we're going to go down here to the good score room, and we're going to make that our background with the no tiling. And going back into OBG insert, going to our draw event, let's add in draw set font. FNT 8-bit, which is a font that we have included in the game here. And we'll give that another test run and see how that looks. And we can see now that it looks a little bit prettier. We're going to do new test. Hit enter. And there, new test is at the top of the list. Now let's fix up this room here a little bit. We're going to add another background. And again, I have this one saved on my desktop. We're just going to use a background of a grid right here, just to give it a little bit of a fun appearance. Here we're going to go into score table, and we're going to set our background as that image we just created. And then going back into OBG table, we're going to adjust the drawing of it just a little bit. First thing again, we're going to do draw set font FNT 8-bit to make sure we're using the same font as the rest of the game. And we're going to do draw set color C_black. And then at the end, we're going to make sure we set it back to white just in case. And we're going to give another test run and see what that does for us. And we can see we got a little bit more to work on here because our table's way out of alignment, but you can see here that it's showing up with our background, and once I line that up, that'll be a nice looking table. Let's try some different values here. And then we can see we got it in line there. We just need to pull it up some. Almost there, one more little tweak. And it looked like we could probably use a little more spacing between the lines. Maybe that didn't work like I hoped it would with the static background image. And you can see there we've got a pretty well in-line table. It's nice, it kind of fits the theme of the game. You would obviously want to probably add a message or something, but the basic idea is there, and that'll give you a good idea of how to build a theme table. Of course, you can do a lot more with different fonts, different spacings. You can draw your own table instead of using a static image like I did. You can pretty much do it any way you want. But hopefully this gives you a pretty good idea how to get this integrated into your game. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email us.